I'm Helen Sharp from the Knitting School in Seattle, and this particular video is a request from a subscriber, and it goes back to the class I did a couple of weeks ago on knitting brioche on the knitting machine. I had mentioned a single bed brioche fabric, and she requested to know how to do that. So I'm going to show you how to do that today using a punch card. And I'll also show you a couple of other fabrics that you can do using the same punch card and tuck stitches. So here we are back with the Treasury of Knitting Patterns by Barbara G. Walker. And I'm looking at this double brioche or three-dimensional honeycomb stitch. And here it is done on the knitting machine. So you can see it's a really pretty, almost crochet like stitch that has a lot of depth to it. This is actually the purl side of the fabric. The knitting side is actually not very interesting. There's definitely more interest on the wrong side or the technical back of the fabric. This is the punch card that I used to make that tuck stitch fabric. It's a very simple stitch, and this punch card is going to knit where the holes are, and it's going to tuck where there is no holes. So you can see it does one thing for 2 rows, and then it does the alternate thing for the following 2 rows. And I'm going to show you 3 different fabrics, tuck stitch fabrics, that you can do using this one card. So I've got a few rows of jersey or stockinette on my machine already. I'm working with 2 ends of 2 28/8 cashmere. I don't know if you can see that in there. Normally, if I was working with that weight of yarn on this machine and I was just knitting some jersey, aka stockinette, stocking stitch, I'd probably be about tension 5. But because I'm going to be doing tuck stitch, I want to loosen my tension. So I'm going to go to, I'll try tension 8. And I also want to put a bit more weight on the comb. And usually when you're trying out different stitches, it's always a question of balancing tension and weight until you get it just right. The other thing that I need to do with a tuck stitch is put my brushes down. Let me just get my carriage where you can see it. So for the brother machine, you just flip these little levers up, and that puts the brushes down. So now I'm ready to do my needle selection row. I've got my card in locked position, and it's on row 1. So that just means that row 1 of the card is down inside the machine and it's being read by the mechanism. It doesn't mean that the row that you're seeing that has the number 1 next to it is row 1, just to clarify that. So I'm going to put my carriage knob to KC, and that just tells the carriage to start looking at the punch card. And I'll go across and knit 1 row, and it'll feel different as soon as you're working with the punch card, because you engage with this drive belt behind, and it just has a completely different feel. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but I have now got my needles arranged according to the first row of the punch card, which looks like 1 needle forward and 1 back, alternating all the way across the needle bed. And this is one of the reasons that I like the Brother knitting machines as opposed to other brands of machines, is because the needles when the needles are selected, they get pulled forward and you can actually see what's going to happen on the following row. So what is going to happen on the following row is the needles that have come forward are going to knit, and the needles that have stayed behind are going to tuck. That's as long as I push in my 2 tuck buttons, which I'll do right now. So I've got my tuck buttons in, I've got my looser tension, I've got my brushes engaged, and I'm going to move the punch card to the small arrow position there, which just means it's going to chug down one space for every row that I knit, and then I'll just start knitting. So because of this particular punch card, what happens is we tuck twice on each needle, and then the needles switch position. And I can see actually something's gone a bit haywire here. I think this could have been a problem with the card, but I'm just going to knit that one there. And I'll just keep an eye on the card. This was a hand punch card, so it could have a little hole not quite in the right place. So I can see my tuck stitches. Now my needles that previously tucked have come forward and they're going to knit. So now you can see this pretty tuck pattern emerging here. And it looks like something's caught behind the gate peg there, so I'm just going to lift that up. I think that was all to do with that first weird stitch that happened there. And now I'm going to do a little bit where I move the punch card to the extended, the stretched position, which is the long, skinny arrow. And this means it's going to knit each row twice. And so instead of tucking for 2 rows and switching position, the needles will tuck for 4 rows and then switch position. So it's going to exaggerate the fabric. So can you see the difference between the second setting and the first setting? This is giving you a much more of a sort of honeycomb pattern here. And it's going to just have a lot more depth to it. Here's the final swatch I made. I'm going to show you what it looked like before it got washed too, because it is industrial yarn. It needs a wet finishing process where you remove all of the oils and waxes that are put in there to ease knitting on the machine. And you can see after it's been washed, it's really lovely and soft and bulky. So I had to re-knit this swatch from the demo that I showed just because it got a bit hosed up in the knitting. And so here we've got the original setting with the middle arrow or the middle triangle where the card rolls down once each time. So just as a reminder, this is what the punch card looked like. Whereas the hole punched, that's going to knit. And where there's no hole punched, that's going to tuck. And if you remember from a previous video, knit stitch, the notation looks like this, and the tuck stitch looks like this. So this one down below was exactly as the punch card is. And so the notation for that would be knit, tuck, and then it just repeats across. The second row is the same, knit, tuck, and then the next row would be tuck, knit, tuck, knit, and then it repeats that way too. And then this next one was extending the pattern by sliding the little lever up to the next, to the long arrow. So this one was the short arrow. And then this one here is knit, tuck, knit, tuck, knit, tuck, knit, tuck, and then tuck knit, tuck knit, tuck knit, tuck knit. And so that was on the long setting, so each row is done twice. Up here I did a little variation where I just had the left hand tuck button pressed instead of both of them pressed. So what we've got here is something that looks like this. So it goes knit, tuck, and then the next row is just knit, knit. Because regardless of what is happening on the punch card, if you don't have one of those buttons pressed, it's not going to do anything, it's just going to knit. And then the next row would be tuck, knit, knit, knit. And then the final one at the top is, so this again is on the small triangle, and then the top one is on the long triangle. So that was knit, tuck, knit, 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 tuck, knit, knit. And then, sorry, knit, and then tuck, knit, 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 tuck, knit, knit, knit. So that was on the stretched out arrow. So you can just see how you can play around with just one punch card, that one punch card, and we've gotten 4 different fabrics off it, plus the 2 color one. And that's not even talking about using it for doing a single jacquard or doing a slip stitch. So I'm going to possibly blow your mind a little bit with this next swatch. I've switched to a high contrast yarn. I'm working with white and I'll be switching to orange in a minute. And I've put on a single bed color changer because I'm going to be striping every 2 rows. So it's just going to make it a little faster. I've got the same punch card in and I've got it set to the middle position where it just moves once down for every row. And I'm just going to do a few rows because I want to figure out when it switches position. So I'm going to do my needle selection row, move the lever to the middle position and push my tuck buttons. And if I look at my end needle on the right hand side, I can see that it's in the back position for tucking next. And it's still set to tuck. And now it's come forward to knit. So this is where I'm going to switch color. So I'm going to switch color every 2 rows in the same place that the pattern or the needle switch position. So are you ready for the big reveal? This is the 2 color stripe that I was doing using that same punch card. And on the reverse side of the fabric, you get a sort of tweedy effect. But when you flip it over onto the other side, you get, instead of a horizontal stripe, you get a vertical stripe. It looks like I effed it up a bit down there. But this is all coming about because of the tuck stitches and the way that a tuck stitch is hidden behind a knit stitch. And this really only works with that particular card when you change color with the pattern change. Up here I did a little bit of 4-row striping with the card set on the stretch pattern, but it wasn't very happy doing it. And you can see it's just had a more exaggerated version of this fabric down here. And on the back side, you still get that vertical stripe. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you are interested in machine knitting, please go and check out my website, www.theknittingschool.com. You'll find classes posted through 2019 in beautiful Seattle. Please feel free to make requests for future videos on the feed below and subscribe.